There is one film that so many of my students get wrong. Michael Mann's 1992 film, The Last of the Mohicans. In essays or class discussions, students accuse the director of doing what is commonly known as red-face casting, arguing that by casting Irish actor Daniel Day-Lewis as the titular Mohican, the film participates in a defacement of American indigenous culture and is a slap in the face to Native American actors. While I am sympathetic to what motivates this criticism, it is nevertheless untrue. Daniel Day-Lewis does not play the last of the Mohicans. His character, Nathaniel Hawkeye, clearly identifies in the film as a white character adopted and raised by Mohicans.
Where's your real family?
They buried my mom, Pa, and my sisters. Chingachgook family with 2 French trappers raised me up as his own.
I'm sorry.
I'm not remembering. I wasn't but 1 or 2.
How did you learn English?
My father sent Uncas and I to Reverend Wheelock's school when I was 10.
This is consistent with the character that author James Fenimore Cooper wrote in the original novel, as well as paintings, book illustrations, and previous film adaptations. The actual title character is Chingachgook, who is played by Lakota actor and Native American rights activist Russell Means.
In these United States of America, this great country of ours, we American Indians, we can be anything we want to be, except American Indians.
Normally, I would take this as evidence that my students had not actually watched the film and thus faked their way through the assignment. But in retrospect, I'm willing to write this off as an honest mistake for one crucial reason. The dialogue in the film is not that memorable. Last of the Mohicans is a visual masterpiece. It is a film that prefers showing over telling. It's the images that stay with you. Combined with Trevor Jones and Randy Edelman's iconic score, the film is what director Michael Mann describes as a symphonic narrative. Yes, it is a literary adaptation and a remake of a 1936 film, but the film harkens back to even earlier forms of visual storytelling. There are moments of sustained action, the camera moving in wide angle like a moving panorama painting. There's the elk hunt that opens the film, speechless and elaborately choreographed. The siege of Fort William Henry, recreated with painstaking historical detail, recalls 18th century and 19th century battle diorama spectacles. And the ending cliff battle sequence, according to the film's cinematographer Dante Spinotti, strips back language. There are no more words to be said in the movie. It turns into a beautiful silent film. To understand the power the film's images have over us, we need to travel to Ontario and visit the National Gallery of Canada in Ottawa. Benjamin West's The Death of General Wolfe depicts a moment taking place 2 years after the events of Last of the Mohicans. West recreated this moment from the Battle of Quebec, a pivotal moment in the French and Indian War, or 7 Years' War as the conflict was known internationally. West used costumed actors arranged in various poses and layered with symbolism. Painting in 1770, 11 years after General Wolfe's death, West creates something of a forerunner to modern-day historical epics like Mann's film. Here, complex historical events are narrativized and reduced to a micro-episode. By staging the past, the painting performs a thought experiment about the meaning of events taking place outside the frame. And that's the key word here, thought experiment, a word that historian Natalie Zeman Davis used to describe historical films and account for their popularity. Historical films, according to Davis, can be thought of as thought experiments about the past, involving many participants, real or imagined. In historical filmmaking, research into the past can be widely dispersed across multiple creative departments and existing at all levels of production. How a historical film looks and sounds is based on the resulting decisions. Some directors strive to be as historically accurate as possible. Some filmmakers privilege drama and emotional content over historical accuracy. Regardless of which of these tendencies a director favors more, it is important to remember that both approaches are designed to encourage the viewer to engage with the past with curiosity. With The Last of the Mohicans, Mann is striking a balance between these two tendencies. His approach to historical accuracy and period detail is well documented in the film's behind-the-scenes featurettes and countless online articles. Yet it is how Mann engages with the art forms of the past that is especially interesting. The aesthetic and narrative principles of pre-cinema painters matter just as much in the creation of the film as does the research into 18th century weaponry, the design specifications of Fort William Henry, or the costumes worn by the story's characters. Both West's painting and Mann's film invite the viewer to reconsider their relationship with the past and identify recurring historical themes, or what I like to call the plot lines of history. How does the painting do this? First, let's consider the painting's dimensions. 5 feet tall and 7 feet wide, in anticipation of widescreen framing that would become associated heavily with historical films, including Last of the Mohicans. With this composition, the viewer is invited to navigate a scene that is too vast for the eye to take in one glance. The images are larger than us, a clear foreshadowing of 20th century moviegoing that was essential to making cinema the dominant art form of the modern era. This technique links West's painting and Michael Mann's film to the notion of the sublime, an important feature of late 18th century and early 19th century art. The sublime is defined as something that communicates physical greatness and evokes a sense of awe. In the face of the sublime, the mind feels overwhelmed by or swoons before something greater than oneself. Perhaps the most popular and strongest example in painting is Caspar David Friedrich's The Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog, painted in 1818. Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein, written the same year as Friedrich's painting, provides breathtaking examples of the literary sublime. And cinema offers exceptional examples of the sublime. Too many to name here, but some examples I find striking are the films of Werner Herzog, Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, Jonathan Glazer's Under the Skin, the films of Andrei Tarkovsky, and Roland Joffe's The Mission. In The Last of the Mohicans, we can see the sublime in establishing panorama shots throughout the film, and in scenes of Uncas and Alice falling in slow motion to their death. The cinematic sublime permeates other Michael Mann's films. We can see it in Thief, in Manhunter, in Heat, in The Insider, in Collateral, and so on. In fact, if we were to orchestrate early 19th century sublime paintings to a signature piece of music from Michael Mann's cinematic universe, the result might look something like this. As Laszlo Moholy-Nagy wrote, photography learned from large-scale painting and developed lenses that took, quote, a view of the world beyond the human eye and everyday experience. And we can see this with the wide framing in West's painting and the wide-angle lenses that cinematographer Dante Spinotti uses in Last of the Mohicans. The result is an immersive experience that is well suited for Michael Mann's artistic signature. To establish a core of painstaking realism, then create around it a heightened visual and emotional atmosphere. This immersive quality places Last of the Mohicans as a successor to the legacy of panorama spectacle paintings. Large-scale paintings designed specifically for exhibitions in circular rotundas, with vague or elusive vanishing points. The spectator's vision brought to focus on different points as if an invisible director or editor were present. Writing in the early 20th century, German art critic and historian Abby Warburg identified a key strategy that battle panoramas, like the Battle of Gettysburg cyclorama, uses to engage the spectator. Pathos formula in aesthetic organization designed to mobilize emotions and provide the spectator with a vantage point to experience chaos, a privileged vantage point through which they can navigate the action. In Last Mohicans, we can see pathos formula at work in the planning of the massacre scene after the surrender of Fort William Henry. Planning techniques and scene mapping inherited from 19th century panorama spectacles, remote location scouting by helicopter, leading to the use of 5 different shooting units to film the scene. Techniques that owe a lot to Kurosawa and his battlefield techniques found in films like Ron and Seven Samurai. These techniques of staging and cinematography planning also recall Siegfried Krakauer's view that the world panorama was superseded by cinema, an idea that Mann carried over into the planning of action sequences from his other films, notably the bank robbery scene from his 1995 film Heat. This is a quality that Michael Mann shares with Stanley Kubrick. Mann has cited Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove as an early influence, yet it is Kubrick's 1975 masterpiece Barry Lyndon, set roughly during the same time frame as Last Mohicans, where we can see clear inspiration for Mann's approach to visual storytelling and world building. For Barry Lyndon, Kubrick and cinematographer John Alcott and production designer Ken Adam drew inspiration from the paintings of William Hogarth, Thomas Gainsborough, and Joshua Reynolds. Combined with a natural lighting approach to cinematography, the result is an immersive experience that in many respects foreshadows the creation of virtual worlds that are a mainstay in contemporary museum experiences. Last Mohicans, according to cinematographer Dante Spinotti, also used natural light whenever possible, and paintings also inspired the look and feel of the film. Mann has cited Albert Bierstadt as an influence, stating that he wanted to see how artists saw the environment that the story takes place in, because it no longer existed by the time they started shooting. Though Bierstadt painted nearly 100 years after the events of Last Mohicans, his work plays an important role in understanding Mann's vision of the American frontier and of history. Bierstadt emerged from the Hudson River School tradition, a landscape painting movement from the early 19th century, based largely in New York State, that infused American landscapes with mythic and celestial metaphors, and often with color pyrotechnics. Influenced by European Romanticism, Hudson River School artists drew inspiration from the writings of Emerson and Thoreau, and presented American landscapes layered with the language of emotion and rooted in concepts of American destiny. The Hudson River School exhibited their work mostly in New York City from 1825 to 1875, and according to Diana Strasdies, not only paralleled developing scientific interests regarding America, but also provided Americans with an attractive self-image, a shared political identity, and a reflection of their desire for universal moral and religious truths. Later in the 20th century, nature photographers like Ansel Adams would infuse Bierstadt's luminous vision of the American wilderness with new ideas circulating in art circles that argue that photography should reveal the inner folds of the awareness of the spirit. There's one Hudson River School painter whose work is connected to Mann's film in particularly interesting ways, and that's the work of Thomas Cole. In 1826 and 1827, around the same time that Cooper published the novel Last Mohicans, Cole painted 4 works that depicted scenes from the novel. In a sense, these paintings can be read as pre-cinematic storyboards for a film that wouldn't be made for over 100 years. There is one painting that featured an accompanying passage from the novel, reading like script dialogue and screen action cues. It's not uncommon for paintings, even one centuries old, to provide inspiration for film composition. Beyond Barry Lyndon, films like Pan's Labyrinth, Django Unchained, and Fritz Lang's Metropolis directly cite the painted world through their cinematic images. Other films such as Kurosawa's Kagemusha and Ron used painting directly in the storyboarding process. Yet Cole's Last of the Mohicans paintings tell an interesting story. In each painting, the images are of vast, wide-frame landscapes. There are no close-up of the characters. The figures are dwarfed by the landscape and the natural environment. Cole's paintings, as Rebecca Schwartz argues, create a mythic place in American history, mediating between progress and nostalgia. Both Cooper and Cole use narrative to frame the landscape and use nostalgia to create a sense of historicism and national identity. In Mann's film, the landscape is also used to underscore emerging national identities, but specifically through a clash between the egalitarian society that settlers like John and Alexandria Cameron live in, and the aristocratic European society represented by characters like Monroe, Hayward, Webb, and Montcalm. The film depicts English, Scottish, Irish, French Huguenots, and Mohawk Indians living side by side. The frontier characters in the film, as Hawkeye declares, are not a subject to much at all, least of all not to hierarchical social structures as represented by the British military. The vertical structure of European society is displaced by horizontal affiliation, an approach that can be best described as Mann re-envisioning the American pre-statehood experience through a post-Vietnam, post-civil rights era lens, part of the film's larger historical thought experiment. In this sense, we can see Last of the Mohicans as something of an origin story for the events of Mann's other films. For example, Last of the Mohicans is set during the wake of Jean-Jacques Rousseau's Discourse on the Science and Arts from 1750 and Discourse on the Origin of Inequality from 1755, two crucial works that link the characters of Last of the Mohicans with characters like Neil Macaulay and Vincent Hanna from Heat, or Frank from Thief, or Will Grant from Manhunter. As Alan Woolfolk wrote of the film's opening elk hunt scene, at first glance, this sequence appears to evoke images of Rousseau's natural man, the so-called noble savage. In this scene, The Last of the Mohicans presents images of physically robust, self-sufficient men of the wilderness making their own way in the world and fending for themselves, living in harmony with each other and nature. Yet at the same time, Woolfolk also goes on to suggest a through line in the film between an earlier uncorrupted nature among Americans to the writings of Henry David Thoreau and to the establishment of present-day counterculture. In The Last of the Mohicans, Mann picks up this popularized European myth of a lost natural innocence and projects it backwards in time to the very beginning of the American nation on the frontiers of the New World. In Mann's hands, this European myth is employed to expose corruption in European civilization that are straight out of the pages of Rousseau. Whether this myth has any grounding in American history is perhaps less to the point than the fact that Mann has chosen to inject full-blown moral agents into what Rousseau originally conceived to be an amoral natural state. The state of nature has been moralized and pitted against the corrupting influence of European civilization within the American colonies. Both ideas can also be read as the ideals of the Hudson River School painters rendered cinematically. The characters are dwarfed by landscape and the visual rendering of the corrupting power of warfare. This is a dialogue with visual storytelling of the past used to reveal the plot lines of history with traces of the sublime. Yet Last of the Mohicans uses its echoes of the past to foreshadow the work of Albert Camus, which plays a strong role in shaping Mann's larger cinematic universe. Here, I'm connecting Last Mohicans not to another Michael Mann film, but instead to Mann's recent novel Heat 2, co-authored with Megan Gardner. Early in the novel, Vincent Hanna finds himself in Neil Macaulay's home, a reverse of the iconic and sublime moment from the original film. Vincent finds a copy of Camus' 1942 novel The Stranger, a novel that Neil encountered while in prison. Throughout the novel, Neil filters the existentialism of Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre with a repeated quote of his own, that we are like footprints on the beach. The tide comes through, and you were never there. In Last of the Mohicans, we are told the same, through the eternal language of art and the cinematic sublime, and wedded to the final words of Chingachgook.
A warrior goes to you swift and straight as an arrow shot into the sun. Welcome him, and let him take his place at the council fire of my people. He is Uncas, my son. Tell him to be patient and ask death for speed, for they are all there but one. I, Chingachgook, last of the Mohicans.
Thank you very much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you would like to see more of my work, please visit my website, www.johntrafton.com, or follow me on Instagram and Twitter @JohnTraftonFilm. Thank you very much.